And I think when,
How many
people are coming in the room. Oh, hi everyone. Okay, everyone, we're actually going to be getting started here in the next minute or two, but we want to give people time to log on that are maybe running a few minutes late. So we're here with Jasmine, and Jasmine, actually, can you share with us where you're doing this webinar from? Because I think our audience would find it really interesting.
Yeah, I'm in my tasting studio in San Francisco. I have actually two spaces in this building, which is an artist building, and one of the spaces is my kitchen, and then this one is like the pretty one that has my cakes on display. I meet with clients here, and then my office is on the other side of that back wall there.
That's nice to be able to have both so close to one another.
Yeah, one floor to one floor difference makes, I mean, it's better than having to travel to another space.
That's cool. So do you do most of your tastings in here? Do you sometimes do them on site? How does that work?
Yeah, I do almost all of my tastings here in this room, and then occasionally I'll work with a planner or an event venue that would rather just kind of, for the sake of their client's schedule, host a tasting at the space and do, like a whole day's worth of wedding planning activities. So sometimes I'll just, travel to somebody else's space.
Okay. Well, it looks like most of the people who have signed up are logged on now. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Emily Newman, and I'm the founder of If I Made. If I Made is an online learning platform for creatives, and we offer courses in everything from photography to floral design and now cake design. If this is the first time you're joining us for an If I Made live class, we always like to share a few tips to give you the best viewing experience possible. We are streaming live over the internet, which means sometimes technical difficulties do happen. So depending on the quality and speed of your internet will determine the quality of the picture that you're seeing now. So if you have a slower internet connection, the picture may be delayed or a little bit grainy. But don't fret, we will be sending out a high quality recording of this webinar later this evening. And you'll have access to that link for 48 hours, and everyone will receive it. The second thing we always like to encourage people to do is if you get kicked off the internet or bumped off for whatever or the webinar, just use the same link that you used to log on to this webinar. We'll still be here. And then please keep asking questions throughout the entire webinar. We have reserved time at the end for a Q&A with Jasmine, but we have moderators in the chat who are going to be keeping track of all your questions, and we're going to try to get to as many as possible towards the end of the webinar. And then fourth, we always like to keep the comment section really happy and light. So thank you so much. And Jasmine, I'm super excited to have you here today. For many of you, you already are very familiar with Jasmine's work. She has been in the wedding industry for over 10 years now. And you probably have seen her work on Instagram or probably saved some of your favorite, some of her favorite cakes on your Pinterest. She's known for kind of her signature designs, so aging and kind of naturalized textures. And her work has been featured in everything from Martha Stewart weddings to The Knot to Huffington Post. And we're very excited to be putting together this webinar in celebration of a course that we launched with Jasmine called A New Vision for Cake Design. And I'm actually going to put a link up to this course in the top right of the chat box if you want to take a look at it now. Don't worry, if you click on the link, it won't kick you off the webinar. It'll just open a new tab in your browser. But yeah, Jasmine, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to actually let her take it away and kind of share with you what she'll be teaching in this class.
Thank you, Emily, for the glowing introduction. So the topics I'm going to be covering in the class today are the defining moment in my business that led to making more money while expanding my creative freedom. I actually consider them to be a causal relationship. And then how I continue to innovate and evolve as an artist and actually even structure inspiration into my work. We've broken down 3 pricing revelations that kind of doubled my revenue over the course of 1 year, and how I developed my specific niche in a market saturated by, oh so talented cake designers. We'll be introducing the new online course that we launched this past week, which is very exciting to me. And then at the end, the cake decorating video will be a demo of painting a tarnished metal finish onto a cake, and we'll be doing a Q&A at the end. So we'll welcome all of the questions that people have. And whether you're dreaming of starting a business of your own, working through the night to get your business off the ground, or even if you've been in business for years and you just need something to change, I'm really hopeful that today's webinar will both inspire you to make the changes that are right for your life and include practical suggestions that make those changes feel possible. Personally, I'm interested in the whole field of cakes changing to up-level all of us, which is something that has to be done together. So please take whatever you can from today's webinar to make this work better for yourself and your business.
So Jasmine, a big reason we created this course and even this free class that we're in right now is because we kept seeing similar struggles from cake artists with all different experience levels, feelings of frustration around pricing and sustainability and continuing to stay inspired. And when we started doing some digging, we realized how very few resources there are for cake artists who are trying to build profitable, sustainable businesses. Can you share with us some of the things that you've observed and heard from other cake artists as well?
Yes, I've heard so much from my cake colleagues, both, an email from the webinar prompting earlier, as well as just anecdotally and in my workshops. But the things that I've heard a lot are you're struggling to attract your dream clients. Clients are too often pushing back on your pricing, sometimes even other vendors in the industry who you're working with who bring clients to you. You're not making enough money to sustain your business or your passion, balancing your personal life and motherhood if that's part of your life, and then also running a successful business at the same time. It feels really impossible. A lot of people said that they were stuck in a creative rut and couldn't find the resources to explore new techniques, that really appealed to them and felt personal, and that kind of dovetailed into being in a creative rut just because hustling to stay on top of business demands is, all consuming. So, honestly, it wasn't surprising to hear those things. Mm-hmm. And I've experienced them all myself. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about some of the, a little bit more about my story and kind of how it got to this point. There were two moments in the 12 years that I've been in business where I was sure I was done. I was ready to sell. Just being in this business was causing so much strain on my health and my personal relationships. And during those points in my career, I was struggling with kind of essentially three big things that once I changed made a huge difference. But one of the first things I was struggling with was that I couldn't charge enough for what I was doing because what I was doing were just kind of basic bakery style cake making. I wasn't totally inspired by a lot of the work that I had. And that kind of basic bakery style cake making was really it was more appropriate for larger operations, not just little old me, a place that had multiple cake decorators making, many cake orders every week. So I personally could not charge at the level that I needed in order to sustain my business and myself. Another thing that was challenging was I was saying yes to things that I should have been saying no to. Basically, my business didn't have a clear enough identity to help me inform what kinds of orders I should be taking that would fit with who I am as a creative. So, kind of one embarrassing anecdote about that is the last Minnie Mouse birthday cake I ever made. After a pretty unsavory experience many, many years ago that left me resentful with a very disappointed client, I realized that I had actually done her a disservice by taking that order because it was not an authentic expression for me. I wasn't interested in the subject, nor could I really ever charge appropriately for the amount of time that I needed to invest in order for that cake to meet the standards that I really would have wanted for my work. And then the third big challenge that I would identify is that I was spending too much time on low price point designs. I loved getting to know my clients, designing new flavors instead of offering a menu, researching inspiration for little details to add to the cake. I wanted every cake to feel really special and every cake to be getting my full attention. Especially because each was a unique order. And so I had to make all the little details by hand. I didn't have like a streamlined process. It was all custom work. So I was paying myself well below minimum wage because it was hard to be smart with my time.
Jasmine, what was the point in your business when you thought to yourself, I just can't do this anymore. This just isn't working?
A really big influence was getting married. I'd say when my personal life changed, and then, followed up with having a baby. So, having a family became so important that the all-consuming nature of my business was really intolerable, and it was hard on my family. Before I had my son even. So if I couldn't take the risks necessary to help my business thrive, I was prepared to give it all up. I'd come from a school of thought that I was supposed to be able to do it all by myself, and that I couldn't afford to hire more help. And I hear a lot of people say that, well, I'd love to hire more help, but I really can't afford it. And after several years of really paying for that, for paying for lots of mistakes, actually, I realized that I couldn't afford not to hire more help, that I was not the best person for particular jobs, and my business was actually suffering from the unrealistic expectations I had of myself to wear all of those hats. So, what I realized after paying for all of those mistakes was that I needed to be maximizing my strengths, which was the art side and the personal client relationships, and then delegating the other areas where I was actually weaker and a disservice to my business, like bookkeeping, kitchen management, etc., to other people who were better suited for those jobs, and that was part of streamlining my business, which made a huge difference. I mean, right now it seems so basic to distribute resources like that, but at the time it felt really, really risky. So I understand why people feel that way. But I found that increasing my support and the overhead demands actually generated a higher revenue, because my accountability to paying new employees really motivated me to be charging more for my cakes. I've actually found that a really interesting thing happened as a result of doing that. Once my time and attention were freed up to be focused on the aspect of my business that I was most interested in, I was really able to evolve artistically, and my business was able to mature. I'd spent years developing a skill that finally afforded me the freedom to create whatever I could envision, elegantly breaking the rules, innovating, refining my style. And I felt like I finally had the time to explore and really form something distinctive. So ultimately, my business really started doing better when I was putting more of myself into my art. And that's the relationship that I want to emphasize today. Like getting to put more of yourself in is so healthy for your business. I valued my work more, and if I could find the clients who valued my work too and could pay for that, and then I could afford more support, which freed me up to infuse even more of myself. It was like cyclical, which is what this awesome graphic depicts here. So learning to consistently make my work personal and then even structuring that into my business model, I found that was really key.
So although we go into a lot more detail about this in your course, I love this part of your journey because implementing the structural changes in your business not only made your business more profitable and efficient, but it also freed you up to develop what is kind of now known as your signature look.
Yeah. And, I'd like to emphasize, for me, it wasn't like a moment. It was a process. I spend a lot of time kind of taking in imagery from, art, nature, fashion, other creatives, or just walking down the street. And when I look at all of the imagery I was saving, like in photographs or, that little save button on Instagram or pins or whatever, I was noticing that there were a lot of common themes in what I was being drawn to. And so paying attention to this helped me to define myself in my art. It was a really important mirror. Some of my favorite words that I use to describe what I was seeing in the imagery that I loved the most is sensitivity, subtlety, complexity, depth, and with maybe like one bold or surprising element or something. So those words really became part of my narrative. It was how I talked about my art. It helped provoke kind of an evolution in my ideas for new cakes. They were starting to mature and be more refined in these ways. As a result, the cakes started to develop into the style that I'm now known for. And I'll show you a few examples. This first example is from a series of cakes where I had complete design freedom. These are the cakes I actually made for the course with you guys. And I created a mood board for myself and roughly sketched my vision. And that was something that I could do because I was designing for myself. I, specify the techniques, the general color story, but I wasn't committed to every single detail because I really wanted to give myself the freedom to respond to the cakes as I worked on them. So the next slide shows the final cakes. And you can see there were some evolutions, and that's actually, I think, a really special part of the course because the evolution it just shows so much of the inner workings of my artistic process, and how, responding to what actually is going on instead of adhering so deeply to like what you want it to be and like that rigidity. I feel like that's part of what I'm in love with about making cakes in a really natural process sort of way. So another example on the next slide is these are the inspiration images that I used for an actual wedding cake client. And these are previous cakes from my portfolio that they give a sense of what their cake was going to look like. But instead of, making their cakes exactly like any one of these, it was more just to kind of get a sense of it. And one of the things that I liked about this particular client was that I instructed my future self to listen to Frank Sinatra while making their cake. So I had to download a bunch of Frank Sinatra during the time I was actually making their cake. And having that, and they had mentioned it in their tasting that Frank Sinatra was kind of representative of what their wedding would feel like. So that was for me part of kind of infusing myself into the feeling of what their final cake was supposed to look like. So the next slide shows the sketch that I had done, which yes, is very rough, and I leave it that way on purpose. And then the actual cake that was created from that process. And so, for me, like finding where the client and I have creative resonance and similarity, I feel is important because I'm more likely to succeed in pleasing them with the final product as well as enjoying the process myself. And one of the things that I do is I use the words from my own narrative to talk with them about kind of who I am as a cake artist, and what they can expect from my work. And so they're more likely to get a sense of what the final cake will look like, and they're more comfortable with allowing me to have creative freedom because they're trusting in all the other ways I'm representing, my artistic style. I'm better set up to make my work really personal and for them to be really happy with the final product. A really specific exercise actually that you can do to help form your narrative is one that I do in my workshops because I'm interested in everybody having their own artistic voice. So this is a very practical application. 1, start by writing down 5 sources that inspire you, and it can be anything. It can be another creative's work from any field, specific imagery, nature, etc. And then ask yourself, what do these things have in common? And I'd recommend going a little bit deeper than simply color tones. Sometimes people can be really thrown off by saying, well, I like subtle colors and I also like really bold colors, but like there's probably something else thematically a little bit deeper that you can find that's drawing all these sources together. And then write down some of the words that describe those commonalities, that describe what draws you to these specific inspirations. And these words that you pick, they should feel like home. When you apply the words to your own art, the favorite pieces that you've ever created, they should resonate with like a sense of you. And then I would say just kind of like keep these words with you, check in with yourself as you make your next cakes. Remember these words that you came up with when you're working on your business, any aspect of your art, your branding, etc. For me, as I was refining the sense of myself, I was really inspired and then actually quite committed to only ever make the cakes that felt like me, where, the words for my narrative really define them. And I actually found that it became really hard to make cakes anymore that weren't in alignment with my specific artistic values.
Yeah, and Jasmine, I feel like so many people who are on this webinar are in the exact same place that you were. You know, they're creating cakes that they aren't inspired by, that don't feel like them. It's not taking their business in the direction that they're wanting to go. They're not able to attract the clients that they want. So how did you go about doing this, beginning to make cakes that felt like you and finding clients that wanted cakes that also felt like a combination of you both?
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of a scientific approach. Like I had, I had maybe some words from a narrative. I had some sense of what that was going to be, but I really had to create a body of work, a portfolio that depicted to potential clients what was possible when you came to me for a cake. At the time, no one was going to pay me for something that really only existed in my head. So I had to show them. And that involved a lot of experimentation. I didn't necessarily know where my narrative was going to take me stylistically, but in the process of experimentation and then checking in with myself and then experimenting again, like that really helped to form and refine something important. So, what I might recommend for your own experimentation process is, break the mold, create from your mistakes, and make time to play, in short. And, a few ways to do that, like for breaking the mold, if it feels right for you, because some people are very, have a really classic aesthetic and like rocking that and feeling really true to that. That's just as personal as anything else you could do. You don't have to necessarily be an innovator. You can be a technician. So, find what feels right for you. But for me, breaking the mold was really important. I was finding that, I was running away. I was running in the opposite direction of anything that I was seeing a lot of, imagery-wise in art and design and the cake world. And so, challenging my ideas of what was right or customary, what even qualifies as a tool or an ingredient, I felt was really important. For me, it was important that I do anything in like a really fresh feeling way. Mm-hmm. So, like, for example, at one point when I was really over fondant, because I had a moment where I just fell totally out of love with fondant. I really wanted to use something different. And so I went to an import store here in San Francisco and I found rice paper and I just took it home and didn't really know what to do with it. But I found that I was able to start making flowers with it. And, it was a very unusual and unfamiliar process. I'd never seen anyone use this material on a cake before. So, it just felt like something really revelatory and exciting. And yes, actually, I do teach how to make my rice paper flowers in the course, which is something I've never done before. I've never taught that in any workshop. Another example of this sort of breaking the mold experimentation was with the famous geode cake forged by intricate icings. This was such an arresting cake design that it really caught like wildfire and everyone was jumping on board the trend, making their own version of it. Eventually, inevitably, when I was approached by a couple who wanted the like me version of it, I had to really rethink the whole concept behind the design, bring my unique technique, skills, and ideas to it. And you can see here my, personal evolution of this popular cake design is very different. So it's important to me to like really have my expression and stamp on something, even if it's, already clearly such a loved and beautiful source of inspiration. And then another suggestion for experimenting with your narrative and, this scientific approach of kind of playing with something new is to create from and embrace your mistakes. Maybe even try making them on purpose. Can you see something beautiful in them, even if it's really unfamiliar? One example for me was, in the way that I was able to respond to my bakery and what it was presenting me. My bakery naturally has a really low humidity. It's about 35%. And what that meant was that fondant didn't stay smooth, flexible, and easy to work with. It was crackling because it was very dry and it was hard to cover cakes in the more traditional way, like over the top of each tier without it cracking at the edges. And I had to work so fast and it was pretty frustrating. And I got faster at it, but at some point, like it just wasn't a satisfying enough payoff compared to the effort. So, innovation was kind of right underneath my fingers the whole time. Instead of adhering to the norm of covering my cakes that way with smooth fondant finishes, I realized there was a whole new world of possibility for design in those cracks and the brokenness that was happening naturally. And that inspired me, an interest in attending to what is actually happening as I work versus resisting for the sake of convention or adherence to a design idea. And then a third suggestion for experimentation, I might recommend just setting aside playtime each week. And I know this one's really easy to push aside due to incoming orders, being busy with kids, bookkeeping, it's endless. But if you don't dedicate time for your business to grow, I would imagine you feel more and more stifled. I've definitely heard a lot of people report that. Even if you can't do this regularly, just maintaining an attitude of play with the work that you have on the books can still really benefit you. And I would say, this is an important thing to note. Like, it sounds all wonderful, like, oh, do all this experimentation. But I get that, you do have cakes on the books. It took me a while to turn the work that I had into the work that I really wanted. And so the suggestions that I was making might feel unrealistic in your current business. And, you might be booked out for weeks and months. Can't imagine having the space to play, explore, and innovate. But I found that, if you help to hold it in your mind that this is the place that you want to go with your work, and then taking intentional steps toward creating artistically fulfilling work, here and there, and maybe it will just take a lot of time. Give yourself that time to transition. And for me, I did get there, and that, it was all the difference in the world.
So Jasmine, now we've been seeing so many questions in the chat about pricing. How do you price your work? How do you value yourself? Pricing, pricing, pricing. So guys, we see your questions. We're going to be talking a little bit about pricing in Jasmine's talk today. And then we're also going to be talking about pricing a lot in the Q&A at the end of the webinar. So we hear you, and we're going to get to as many of your questions as we can. Jasmine, around this whole thought of valuing yourself, because this is something that's very important to you, and it's a question that obviously people are very interested in. One of the things that I remember you saying during filming the course was, when I simply create to please the client and not myself, it's much harder for me to appreciate my own work, appreciate my own value. And what this typically ends up resulting is I charge less than what I'm worth. Can you share a little bit more about this sentiment and like why this is, I don't know, just this quote I feel like is just so important. And the first time I read it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so true.
Yeah. I'm sure you totally know, as a creative in this industry and a female business owner particularly. For me, believing in what I was doing creatively really set up the framework for me to believe in my pricing. When you do you're only in competition with yourself. So that's a kind of a fun slide for me. Believing in your value, I think, really leads your clients to believe it too. And I think this is the key to filtering in the clients who are the right fit for your business, which is the best thing. You want people who appreciate your art and your aesthetic, because when the fit is right, you're both more likely to have a happier transaction, and that's really good for your business. I'm not as interested in telling everyone to go for the luxe market as much as I'm interested in encouraging my cake colleagues to find what feels most at home for them. Another thing that actually, this is a really big thing for me. And I just opened a new Instagram account called Cake Coalition. I believe that cake should be valued as art just as much as the art that hangs on the walls. What a cake might lack in longevity, it makes up for in vivacity, because they are at celebratory events. They're the hallmark of celebratory events, which are vivid and they're meaningful. And then furthermore, because of photographs and memories, a wedding or a birthday, all of its efforts live long beyond that single day. That's really worth something. And I don't know if society is there yet with agreeing with that. It's still very unusual for us as cake makers to be charging at similar levels as other high-end designers and artists. So, working together in the cake industry to establish our value is vital to all of our success. Anytime I feel tempted to discount my pricing, I remember how important it is for me to be part of that movement towards making this a truly sustainable business for cake makers at any level of expertise. I've seen far too many of us go out of business or give up because it got too hard.
So Jasmine, you teach that, valuing your time and yourself is internal work, but there are also practices that can help structure and reinforce this development in your business. But how can one actually quantify this to see an increase in profits over time?
There are many ways to do this practically. Personally, I use a 3-prong approach to get my pricing in the ballpark. And it's an approach that I developed after years and years of making lots of, crappy mistakes. And I go over more extensively that approach in the course. But for the purposes of today's time, one quick and dirty approach that I can share that I think would be really helpful to help kind of shift people's mindset around how to do it, how to price, is to start by assigning your business an hourly wage. Not you personally making the cakes, but what does your business need to take home as an income, so to speak? Remembering that has to include your wage, which includes your income taxes. It has to include your employees shopping for ingredients, making deliveries, answering emails, managing an Instagram account, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. And it's going to be much, much, much higher than your personal hourly wage. So treating your business like it's the entity that is taking in the money, that might be a perspective shift for some people, especially who are new to this business. And it might seem really crazy because that number can be so high, like, oh, my business has to, generate, 3 figures an hour. Like, that seems really crazy. And if it does, think about when you meet with other professionals, like other design professionals. For example, about 10 years ago, my first meeting with an architect, he charged me $185 for the first hour. And what I got was a conversation and the opportunity to tell him what I was interested in his services for. I didn't get a proposal. I didn't get to eat any cake, for sure. And before he did even an ounce of work for me, including, even telling me what he could do for me, I had to pay a pretty hefty retainer. So reflecting recently, like in the past few years on that meeting, was kind of a light bulb moment. Like, why is it okay for him to do that in his industry, but it's not okay for me to do that in mine? And, in the cake world version, instead of that first meeting, that yields very little, we have a tasting consultation. So we've already put in a lot of work by the time we're first meeting with a client, making cake for them. And just scheduling it. They're a lot more costly than a simple, 15-minute free consultation on the phone type of loss leader for other types of businesses. So personally, I really make a point to charge, and I don't credit it toward the cost of the cake. And I do that largely to ensure that I'm sitting with serious inquiries. And it's one way I protect my time in my business. One thing that you could try today is to figure out the actual cost of a tasting for you. I didn't do this until many, many years into my business. It was almost like I didn't care. I just accepted that it was kind of part of how my type of business had to be. But when I sat down and, looked at the ingredients and labor, including my actual time, doing all, preparing all of that, and then even writing a proposal afterwards, that time is time that you can't ever bill for. So when you do charge for something, it has to cover all those unreimbursed hours in the long run. I would say that, one thing I would definitely admit is it took me a really, really, really long time to get over my reluctance to respect the function of money. Billing and collecting money, even talking about it, it's kind of a taboo subject. And when I started out, in my bakery, it was fun. I wasn't invested in creating something sustainable to support a family. I wasn't married. I didn't have children. And if my business wasn't thriving, I was the only person impacted by that. So when I had to marry, when I did get married and I had a child, it really changed a lot because it wasn't about me just about me. And so, every hour I was away from my son had to be compensated for, both financially and for my own personal fulfillment. And I was actually prepared to give up my business if it wasn't. So it helped me take a lot of risks.
Every mom business owner I know, and even including myself, struggles with this, the ongoing dance. We kind of have to balance, our family and our businesses. But you've taken some very intentional steps when it comes to your pricing, which came about because you wanted to establish more balance in your life. You were tired of just constantly being, worn out, burnt out. What were these principles and steps that you took to kind of build this profit and margin into your business?
Yeah, I found that it was pretty important to stick to a few rules. So kind of these 3 pricing revelations that the slide is showing, we kind of broke down the process. It's not like I set out to have 3 pricing revelations, but one of those things is that I stopped using other vendors' pricing as a benchmark. I used to price along the lines of what I thought my market was pricing, and my colleagues around me, trying to stay inside market. And, besides being not really knowing exactly what that is, because most people aren't going to tell you outright and it's hard to ask, it took me years to realize that if I was using that as my rubric, my business was really never going to be sustainable. And in a large part because of what I was talking about earlier, culturally and socially, and how cakes are valued or not valued in our culture. Many cake makers have spouses, partners, other jobs supporting them financially and augmenting their income. So I had to look harder at what my business needed to thrive, so that instead of being supplemented by those other things, I was actually contributing more to my family. And I had to educate myself better about what, larger, more stable businesses know about finances. Something that is always kind of a double-edged sword. If you go to a cocktail party or something, you'll hear someone say, "Oh, you're a cake maker. You must love your work, be following your dream." But I believe comments like that really only further reinforce cake makers to charge so little, because we feel we should be paying for the privilege of living our dream, that we left some sort of corporate job in order to do the fun apron, in the kitchen art expression. But breaking away from that thinking was hard, but in the end, it was a lot healthier for me. And I think it was part of maturing as a business. And as a result, my business is more robust. So I'm free to actually continue dreaming. The second revelation that we identified was that I could actually put certain boundaries around my business, such as the hours that I worked per week. It was actually better for my business, and in the long run, it helped me establish a more robust system of support. So instead of the 70-hour work weeks I used to do, I now work less than 40. And part of that boundary was, because of my son. When the babysitter was done, I was done. So before I changed my pricing method, I was letting what I was charging for my work dictate my life. And then what changed is I started letting my life dictate my work. And it just made all the difference in how productive I was during the time that I actually am working. And it made the work that I was doing, it just had to be really, really important. It had to be both fulfilling me and contributing financially. And then the third revelation I'd say is that I found that you might say the art of finance is different than the art of cake design. And that was a lot harder for me to learn. I'm definitely not of that kind of, natural orientation cognitively. So I learned that I actually had to treat money differently. I had to structure it into my business with a plan and an intention, and not just let it kind of evolve naturally and flow like I do with my design process. So I used to increase my pricing based on the level of resentment I felt about how hard I was working, or whether I was turning clients down enough. And that really wasn't an effective system. That wasn't the healthiest thing I could do for my business. After realizing that my business needed to be bringing in much more revenue, it required taking some risks. And I have a few venue accounts here in the city, so I kind of started with them and telling them that I needed to charge 50% more than I had the previous year. Like, that was a really big jump from any, other jump from before. But surprisingly, they really agreed. And that was a revelatory moment for me. So now I make it a practice, along with my business manager, to assess pricing every single year, no matter what. So building that in has actually been very freeing, because now I don't have to leave my business's financial health up to the whims of my emotions. And I know that there's a lot of questions about this. So, it's really big conversation for most of us. Like, it's one of the hardest things to talk about. So, it usually leaves a lot of people feeling really alone. And I go over a lot more specific models in the course of what I do for my pricing. But please feel free to ask questions in the chat. And actually, I wanted to kind of transition a little bit here. The course that I created with you guys, as you know, Emily, is a lot more comprehensive than the material that I offer, even in my in-person workshops, because it's not just the art side, but it's where the art intersects with the business and how that all works together. That intersection, I think, is really, really important, and it's easy to keep them very separate. And also in the course, you can watch me decorate the cakes from start to finish, and that's not something that I do in the workshops as well. Yeah, I feel like anyone can get into this business, because you don't need much startup capital or much of a plan. You don't need a degree, but that actually puts us at a disadvantage when we start to turn our home baking into a legitimate entrepreneurial venture. So I would just like to say that I hope you've benefited a lot from the first part of the webinar, and then again from the demo later as well. And I'll be able to chat with you more later and answer questions. Hopefully you have a few practical ideas to implement and some shifts in your thinking. Most importantly, I hope a clearer sense of what you're interested in developing with your work is kind of showing up more, no matter where you are in your journey. And the full-length course, obviously, it offers so much more. For myself, especially in this exercise of reflecting on my history and like my story and my journey, like, I wish I'd had a course like this 10 years ago. Like, I wish I could have given myself something like this. There wasn't anything like this around at that time, and I definitely had to struggle and learn a lot of things the really hard way. So I'm going to let Emily tell you a little bit more about the course, because it kind of embarrasses me to talk about it.
Guys, thank you so much. We're seeing your questions in the chat, questions around pricing, when's the demo happening, and I can tell you both of those are coming up again here in the next 5 minutes. The demo is incredible. We filmed it in Jasmine's tasting studio. I can't wait for you to share it with you. It's one of her signature painting techniques. So a new vision for cake design. This is the brand new course that we launched with Jasmine, and it's actually made up of 2 parts. Included in the new vision for cake design is the business behind cake design and the art behind cake design. The business portion of the course is a practical and applicable to all sorts of business models. Jasmine teaches her unique blueprint for developing original designs. She teaches her exact sales process that converts 90% of her tastings into cake orders. And this is without Jasmine having to discount herself. She shares her entire client experience from inquiry to booking. I saw a lot of questions in there about how do you attract a client? How do you get them, to pay the prices, to justify what you're doing, to continue to build your business? She shares all of this. She also includes the templates of the actual proposals and forms that she uses in her business. And she shares the pricing model, which eventually took her from $100 to $2,000 minimum cake orders. And this is a sentiment we saw a lot in emails and on social media. How do I build my brand to a point where I can actually make a profit on the cakes that I'm making? And Jasmine goes into her whole journey on that and gets very specific in her actual financial systems and how she prices her cakes. Behind the business can be helpful for wherever you are in the age of your business. We see a lot of beginners on this webinar asking questions about how do you even start? I can't tell you how just how much more different your business would be starting off with a resource like this than trying to start off on your own. Jasmine and I talk about this a lot, about how much we would have wished to have resources like this when we started our businesses, because we made so many costly mistakes that weren't necessary. This just shortens your learning curve in such a huge way. The business course is broken down into 5 video lessons, and this covers Jasmine's creative process, her stories and struggles, and the tipping point that helped her find her aesthetic of voice. It also covers branding and marketing. Jasmine talks about turning her artistic voice into a brand that placed her identity in the market. And she shares her entire client experience. So this is Jasmine's client interaction from start to finish and how she manages her time in business to be more workable and efficient. It also includes her pricing. And this is where Jasmine discusses philosophy on pricing, sustainability, her actual financial systems, including how she charges for cakes, deliveries, and tastings. She goes into all of those nitty-gritty details. She also covers equipment and logistics. This includes a tour of her industrial kitchen. You get to see the equipment she uses and how she delivers her cakes. And it also includes her proposals and templates. And I can't tell you how valuable these are on your own. I mean, Jasmine, you were actually sharing with us how the contract that you use that's included with this course is something that you've had to revise numerous times over the years, just because you've reached these intersections in your business where you've kind of something happened that had never happened before, and so you had to kind of accommodate for it in the contract. I mean, this isn't something that you're going to be able to find on a template on Google, right?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly couldn't find it 12 years ago when I was starting, and then like to continue to refine it, it came out of making those mistakes, and then not having covered my what. So
yeah, and I mean, the great thing about these are things that you're going to be able to download off your dashboard and start using in your own business right away. You can customize them that make sense for you, but these are the actual client proposal, tasting sheet, and delivery sheet that Jasmine uses in her own businesses.
And I would recommend, everybody making them really personal for themselves too. Like this, that's something that's really important to me. Like those are templates that can really get you started and help you think about things you would not have known to think about until you went through the experience. But, every business is going to be unique, so you can customize these completely.
Yeah. The art of cake design includes cake basics, essential tools for creating textured designs. You'll watch how Jasmine designs and decorates 3 of her signature textured tiered cakes, and you'll learn how to improve your technique with step-by-step instructions from multiple camera angles and 9 video lessons covering materials and tools, which is where Jasmine discusses the tools she uses, both basic and unexpected, and the process of designing the course's cakes. You'll also learn her rough stone base and bas relief. So Jasmine walks you through the base texture she uses for many of her designs, her very unusual way of applying fondant, which is very exciting to watch. I can tell you I was there firsthand. It was super cool. And her version of creating and applying bas relief. She also teaches her kintsugi design technique, as well as her metallic and aged painting technique, which is all about impressions and how do you create this kind of subtle metallic finish. And for the first time ever, she teaches her rice paper flowers technique. And so she teaches you how to form these kind of translucent and delicate flowers and treat them for different finishes. I saw some questions earlier about, how do you treat these rice paper flowers differently? This part of the course is broken into 9 step-by-step videos, and they're filmed from a variety of gorgeous camera angles. And Jasmine, this is something that we actually spent a lot of time on set, actually making sure that the camera angle was perfect, and that it was the most helpful it could be for someone who was watching from a video screen rather than being there right there in person. And I think we got it. I mean, it took a little bit, but we finally got that perfect angle.
Yeah, I really appreciated the crew for, they were so engaged. They really were invested personally in making sure to get every last thing. Like every time I would do something that somebody noticed out of, the corner of their eye, like, oh, that's really interesting. Wait, let me catch that on film. Like, it's beautiful. This course is so beautiful. I'm really, really happy with everybody who participated in making it.
Yeah, no, it turned out, just gorgeous. I'm so excited for the students to get into it and start learning. Although the retail price of this course is $13.98, you can actually buy it now for $9.88. We're doing a $400 discount off this week in celebration of the launch. And this is the most discounted price the course will ever be. Even during our annual sales, it will never be this low again. We're going to put an offer up on the right-hand side of the screen that takes you directly to the launch page to learn more about the course. If you click on it, don't worry. You're not going to be kicked off the webinar. It'll just open up as a new tab on your window. I know you guys are really excited about the demo we have coming up, so you won't lose your place in the webinar. Some of the things that you're going to get in the course, or all the things you're going to get, are 4 hours of video lessons, or business lessons, 4 hours of texture techniques, 3 unique cake design tutorials, a proposal and tasting sheet templates, Jasmine's favorite supplies and resource guide, which is huge. I mean, so much time in the beginning of a business is taken having to kind of source and find your resources. And Jasmine shares with you everything that she uses in the course. I mean, that in itself is so valuable. And Jasmine shares her pricing models. So I understand what a huge investment this is at any point in your business, whether you're starting out, whether you're a couple years in. And that's why we are offering payment plans for only $99 a month. And this is this week only. It's a special that we're doing in celebration of the launch. And we know what a huge investment this can be at any point in your business. So we're excited to offer more accessible and affordable payment plans for both US and international residents. So when you go to the launch page, you'll see an option to check out and add the monthly payment plans. And yes, you will receive access when the course is released on Monday. So you won't have to wait until the payment plan is finished to receive access to the course. One of the questions we get is, what's the difference between attending an in-person workshop with Jasmine and buying the online course? And although attending an in-person workshop is super helpful, I mean, being able to go deeper and revisit the material makes a new vision for cake design valuable in a way an in-person workshop can never be. Plus, like Jasmine mentioned earlier, Jasmine shares her entire approach to building a profitable business, which you can only access through this online course. A couple great things is you have lifetime access to this on any device. So you can learn as you go. You know, a lot of people are watching our classes commuting to work, or they're watching, you know, so mobile,
hopefully
tablet, computer. And so, yeah, I mean, we just want people to be able to access no matter where they are in life. And you have lifetime access to it, so you can keep revisiting the material. Yes, that's true. They're watching it on the train. I should make an exception for that. We've seen photos of people watching the videos on the train, which is really exciting. We offer a 15-day money-back guarantee. And we do this because we believe so much in the content and its ability to transform your business that we want to make sure there's absolutely no risk to you in purchasing this course. And this is for payment plans as well. So we also know that the reviews are the best way for you to feel confident about your investment. And Jasmine's students experience, I mean, just entire shifts in their perspectives about traditional cake conventions and walk away, you know, seeing their businesses and artistry in an entire new light. So if you're interested in reading more of these testimonials and hearing from some of Jasmine's previous students, you can either look at her profile at Jasmine Ray Cakes or look at the hashtag JRC Workshops. Something very exciting that we're offering just on this webinar is a fast action bonus. It's a bonus video that actually Jasmine did for us in her tasting studio in San Francisco. It's a color theory video. And this is actually something that we decided to do a little last minute. I am so happy that we did because it's an incredible video. And I think, you know, if you didn't go to a traditional fine art school, this is probably something that, you know, color theory is just not something that's taught in regular school. And it's certainly something that's not taught if you go get a psychology degree or a business degree. And so what makes this video so unique is not only does Jasmine cover the foundational kind of, you know, just the foundations of color theory, but she also applies it specifically to the nuances and kind of like the niches that we experience in the wedding industry. So, you know, this next slide kind of shows you, you know, she specifically teaches you kind of how to neutralize and naturalize your color tones as well as color matching. Because brides want these beautiful kind of nuanced colors like blush and peach and cream and off-white. And these colors don't come out of the box. These are colors that you have to create custom. And Jasmine goes into detail about how she kind of gets those really beautiful, more nuanced colors. And this is color theory applied to cakes. And I don't know of any other resource online that covers this. And this is a bonus that's just exclusive to people who purchase on the webinar. And so if you purchase within the next 30 minutes, you get access to this video for free. Something that I like to end on before we move into the demo, which is coming up right next, is I want to share this quote with you from one of Jasmine's students, because I think it speaks so truly to so many struggles that cake artists experience. As artists, we tend to have two tracks in our brain. The creative side often wins, but there's this whole other side where you know that if your business isn't sound, you aren't making money, or if you're burning yourself out, then you won't be able to do the creative things that you want. The creative part is why we know Jasmine, but the business part is why she's still around. And both of these are equally important, which is why a new vision for cake design is so valuable. And so the question I have for you before we begin the demo is, what are you going to do today to stop the cycle of not charging enough, of overbooking yourself out of fear, and continuing to make cakes you aren't inspired to create? You know, this kind of doom loop that so many artists struggle with doesn't have to be your story. You know, don't let the business side get in the way of the creative things you aspire and dream about doing in your life. There is a better way. And we believe in these principles and strategies and techniques taught by Jasmine in A New Vision for Cake Design. And we believe that they will help you build the business of your dreams. So guys, we're going to start the demo now. Jasmine's going to be answering questions in the chat. So feel free to be asking questions while the video is playing. And then after the video is done, we're gonna come back, Jasmine and I, and we're gonna do a live Q&A, and we're gonna try to get to as many questions as we can that were asked during the webinar. We're also, just keep in mind, guys, the offer is there, and if you purchase within the next 30 minutes, not only do you get the $400 discount, but you also get that color theory video. So I'm gonna move over to the demo video now, and Jasmine's gonna move into the chat and answer some of your questions.
I'm going to paint this cake, which is just some cake that I had lying around. It really doesn't matter too much what the base of it is, although preferably I prefer it to be darker. I'm going to paint this cake like tarnished silver. Tarnished silver has a lot of different expressions. There's actually quite a lot of warmth that comes out in it. Sometimes copper tones, blue tones, pink tones, yellow tones. So I'm going to pretty much let the whole color palette be available to me as I'm working with it and make my choices as I go. You could easily do this technique on top of a much darker surface, and it'll just add a richness and a depth to it, which I really love. So because I don't have that option in this particular cake, I'm going to just add a little bit of darkness in certain areas. So I have here my tray of luster dusts. This is a tray of kind of like warmer and redder tones, and this is much cooler silvers and whites. And then I have got pure lemon extract as my medium to kind of make a paint out of my luster dusts. I'm going to paint into this general area just to show a little bit of the variation that occurs when you have some bas relief on it, and then when you also have the darker tones as depicted by this color. And at this point, I'm mostly interested in just getting a little bit of coverage, darkening up some of the areas, particularly in the shadows of the bas relief, and then maybe randomly throughout. I'm allowing there to be some variation. The colors that I layer on top will be largely more opaque, so it's not going to be too important about some of the harsher lines. The variation will come through because it's not completely opaque. So that's enough of a base just to give me something to start layering on top of. I'll get some really light areas where the areas are not covered by the mahogany color, and then I'll get a little bit more richness in some of these other areas. I might even add actually just a touch more. And when I put after I put the silvers on top, I can still go back in and layer more of the mahogany if I want it to have a little bit more expression. So now I'm going to grab a few areas with a little bit of color variation. I'm going to put in a little bit of a kind of blushy luster in order to get some pink tones to come out. And I can go back in and continue to refine that if I want more pink later. I started with a really warm base because tarnished silver actually warms up quite a bit from a polished silver. So now when I layer my next color on top, which is going to be kind of our basic silver coat, it'll have a lot of the warmth from this underpainting. I'm letting some areas be much more opaque with the silver layer, and then some areas be much thinner so that the underpainting can shine through. When I go over the bas-relief areas, I just kind of want to scrape over so that a lot of the underpainting of the mahogany and blush colors are still coming through in the most recessed parts of the bas-relief. So even though tarnished metal is typically very smooth, I actually like painting it on a very roughened surface. So this is my rough stone technique. At the base, underneath it, it has a lot of crackling. It has some kind of coarse texturing added in right here. I think it just makes it overall a little bit more interesting. In general, this will still read as tarnished silver, even though it doesn't have the smoothness that real silver might. So now that I have a basically silver looking layer, I can go back in and maybe add a little bit of gold here and there if I want to enhance it, or you could even tone in some blues or more pink or green. So it's kind of up to you how you want your tarnished silver to be expressed. You can even go in and darken it a little bit more. So I'll just show you a couple of quick options. I don't bother ever cleaning my brush as I'm moving between unless I'm trying to keep my sections pure, but in my mixing areas I like to keep my brush with a little bit of residue from the previous color that I used, and that'll help just continue the incorporations. So here's a little bit of gold on here, and there's an area here that's kind of already getting a little bit gilded. So I'm just going to see kind of how does that gold come in to express and add a little bit of interest. Maybe that's something that I want or is relevant to the design or the palette of the cake that I'm working on. And then if it just feels like the gold took over too much, you can always layer in a little bit more silver and let the gold be more of an underpainting that peeks through. Now I'm going to add a little bit more pink. This is kind of a blushier luster. And sometimes you can just let little areas like that exist, or if you want it to have a little more of a feature, you can brush it over the bas and give it a little bit of pink expression there. Sometimes you can simply use cornstarch if you'd like to preserve the color as it is, or you can use petal dust as an opportunity to bring in a little bit more color and variation if you like. So I just have on hand some ivory petal dust, plain cornstarch, and then a variety of petal dust colors. I brushed most of the luster off of this brush, but I'm going to keep this brush so that as I'm adding the cornstarch on, I might still be able to kind of help preserve the finish of the luster. Because tarnished silver isn't polished and bright, I'm using the cornstarch to help matte it out a little bit. If I want it to have an even stronger matte quality, I can use petal dust, which has a little bit of color to it. In this case, just simply the ivory, and that'll dull it out even more. And even when I dull it out, I want to leave some areas kind of peeking through. Maybe these are the little areas that were able to resist the effects of the tarnishing and maintain their glossy shine. If you're going to add color to the situation, just consider what sort of finish you're going for. You might still want to keep something generally in the lighter tones so as to preserve what you've already painted, but a little bit of pale blue or grayish blue can make a difference. And that's really getting in there. And if you keep forcing the brush over, you might even lift some of the paint from before. And now it's really starting to look tarnished right in there. And then I'm just going to show you by adding a touch of a darker red color. I'm going to dull it out a little bit with my ivory. So now I have kind of a neutrally mauve, and how that might tone down an area like this super bright silver. And then maybe even venturing a little bit more into the red. This silver was so cold and bright and sharp, and a deeper red. Pink it up a little bit, warm it up a little bit. So up here I have a little bit of the gold, and I'm going to bring in that camel color to just help accentuate it and draw it out a little bit more. And that's looking a little bit more like the part of tarnished silver that starts to discolor into those warmer bronzer tones. And I'll show you what it looks like on the flatter areas too. I'm pushing the brush quite hard. I'm simultaneously lifting the luster from underneath, and I'm adding the matte color from the petal dust. In conclusion, you can just keep playing with the surface until you're getting all the areas the way you like it. And if at any point it's starting to lose too much silver, just layer it back on.
So, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for the demo. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Now Jasmine is going to answer some of the questions that we've been seeing from you coming through the chat. We're going to try to get to as many as possible. Just a quick reminder, you guys can still get that free color theory video included with the purchase. You still have time. Feel free to ask questions in the chat if you're having trouble checking out, or if you have any questions about the course and for Jasmine in particular. So Jasmine, Michelle asks, what's the best way to reject those clients' designs that aren't in my best interest?
The best way to reject them. I would say that what I do, instead of it being more of a rejection process, I try and go a little bit deeper with the client. If a client brings an image to me or a cake that they're really inspired by, that that they've seen on Pinterest or wherever, it isn't about adhering to that image. They like that image because it's evoking something for them that they're feeling, and what they like is that feeling. So I try and focus the conversation on what is the feeling that this image, starting from that point to kind of re-begin the design process from there, instead of starting at a cake that they brought in that I didn't necessarily feel was the right fit for me. And if we can get to a new place that is, part of the relationship of me as the artist working with them, then that's the cake to propose. And, in the end, it's still up to them to decide, which felt like they were being honored enough.
This next question actually speaks, Jasmine, to something we were talking about right before we got on the webinar. Maliha, sorry if I'm butchering that, Maliha. She asked, do you think cake decorating is a skill that could be developed, or is going to school necessary? And you actually have some really good thoughts on kind of that question and dilemma, and how it is, feels very different than traditional industries, but there's actually a lot of overlap between being a cake artist and, going to get a law degree or a medical school degree. Can you kind of share a little bit more about kind of your philosophy behind, starting a cake design business and not necessarily going to school for it?
Yes. Can you just repeat the question again too?
Yeah. So she asked, do you think cake decorating is a skill that could be developed, or is going to school for this necessary?
Right. I don't think going to school for it is necessary. There are kind of two prongs that most people approach cake decorating, and one is kind of the culinary world, and then the other is the art world, and more the art world now than it used to be. It used to be very much culinary based. So, people are coming in kind of ready to focus on different aspects of the cake decorating. And, sometimes it is very much more, what's more important to the person doing it is the art side. And then for some people, it's more about the taste experience side. So, being able to educate yourself and take care of both of those, and then really focus perhaps on, whatever interests you the most about it. I don't think you need a special degree or education, but that's one of the things kind of that messes us up. I'm just going to riff off of this a little bit, because it can mess us up a little bit in the business side. So, and there really isn't a business education degree that you can get for being a cake decorator. I mean, this course is one of the few resources I even know to educate about something like that. So one thing that I might say is, because we're entering this field without having a degree specifically, or you don't need accreditation to get into this business, it's important to remember that you're piecing together your education as you go, as you're making cakes and running a business. Your hours of doing the discounted work at the beginning should count toward that investment. That for those of you who are buying today's course, to remember that your continued education, improving your business practices and learning more techniques, really does entitle you to more compensation. So even though I wouldn't say that you necessarily need to be educated to get into this, value your education and make sure that turns into some form of rebuilding resources or compensating you financially.
Mm-hmm. So pricing is such a huge topic, and obviously there are a lot of questions very specific to different models and businesses, because every business is a little bit different. So it's a big conversation that I know that you cover pretty extensively in the course. In fact, we have an entire video on it, in addition to kind of also including, your tasting sheets, your delivery sheets, kind of your proposals as well. Mm-hmm. But Christina asks, when you base your prices, i.e. kind of on materials and hours, do those hours count as your profit, or do you charge a certain extra amount to compile a profit? And And there's actually a worksheet included with the course that kind of goes into your pricing. But can you kind of share a little bit about, how does it work with your prices and pricing for materials and hours versus like, what counts towards profit per se?
Right. It might be a little complicated to, answer the question straight out like that. But I will say that personally, I use what I consider like a three-prong approach. One, I think which is very typical, one prong of this approach would be, looking at your market. But that actually I consider to be the least important prong. That's more just to kind of like check yourself from the first two. And the first two are different formulas that account for, just kind of like a general rule of thumb type of business formula that's supposed to be a catch-all to make sure that your wage is being covered, your overhead is being covered, your cost of goods sold is being covered, and even having reserves, which is something that I don't think a lot of cake makers even really know to do when they're opening a business. And then the other approach that I would say is kind of starting more with like, what are my actual expenses? And even then, I think a lot of people don't take into consideration all of their actual expenses. That needs to, that when you come up with your wage for your business, not just your wage for yourself as a person, that business wage needs to account for that you're going to pay taxes, that you do need those reserves, all of your actual expenses, and then also your unbillable hours. This is not like being an attorney where you can just like check a clock and start billing somebody for that time. So the money that you are billing for, for the cakes that you're making, all of that has to be inflated enough to cover all that other time that you put into running your business.
Anna Lucia says, I'm just trying to start following my artistic voice and quit making Paw Patrol cakes. Jasmine, did you erase your portfolio of the traditional designs? I mean, I'm considering erasing them so clients will be confused on what I want to offer, but I also feel like the portfolio showcases my ability and techniques. That's kind of that like transition point we were talking about earlier. It's kind of like a little bit of a dance. What would be your suggestions for Anna Lucia?
Yeah. Hi. Thank you very much for that question. That's a really good one. Curating your portfolio is really, really important. One thing that we erased from the webinar content, which I'm really glad that I get to kind of put back in with this question, is, it's better to have 5 really strong cakes in your portfolio that represent where you want to go as an artist than it is to have 20 cakes that are just kind of showing that you have skills all over the place. If you have a skill, in making those Paw Patrol cakes or like whatever else, it could be like shoes or a handbag, and maybe it's not something you want to make again. I don't know, but you can use those skills and create a portfolio piece that shows off what you're good at, without it having to necessarily have been in order that was really specific and had elements on it that didn't feel right for you. And the sorts of work that you want to do in the future. So for example, I have a cake in my portfolio that I show to clients. I have a couple cakes. I have one that's like a stack of newspapers because I did a really good job making those newspapers. And I want people to know that the skill level is there. And I have a birdhouse in my portfolio, but like I made sure that the photographs of them were really, really nice and that the cakes in all fit in alignment with my style.
Another question we have is, I'm a home and hobby baker, but desperately want to start my own business. I just don't know how to market myself. And Jasmine, you actually speak a lot to this in the course. We actually have a whole video on branding and marketing. Like, how did you get your name out there? Because you started in a very similar place in that, no advertising dollars, starting from scratch. And you actually have a really cool story about how you got the word out, and it wasn't intentional. It just kind of happened.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the very beginning, and there have been like different kind of plateaus of like getting the word out. It's like kind of to new sectors of the market. But, in the very beginning, I think the story you're referring to is Cupcake Wednesday, which was a very personal, meaningful thing that I was doing. And it was largely just, my bakery's in an artist building. And I used to walk around and sell cupcakes for $1 just to my fellow artists, like, at tea time, like pick me up time. And then it kind of started to get bigger as, people were bringing the cupcakes to the street, and then other people from neighboring buildings would find out about it. And, I've even had people like who read about some secret pop-up like in Taiwan. And then when they came to visit San Francisco, they were like, ringing my doorbell to come try out these dollar cupcakes. So it ended up being, kind of an unexpected, very personally oriented guerrilla marketing that, I didn't intend it to be that way, but the reach of it was really powerful. And I think part of it was because it was so personal for me. It really was meaningful for me.
One of the things that we saw kind of in the chat was around, there's just so many different types of bakers from so many different types, just experiences and walks of life. And one of the things that I really love about this course is that it's so helpful whether you're just getting started and you want to do it right. You want to start off on the right foot. You want to make as many or the least amount of mistakes as possible, spend the least amount of money as possible, making those mistakes. Because Jasmine and I, we can attest, you spend a lot of money making mistakes at the beginning. Or if you're established and you're looking to find a better way, you're burnt out. Like Jasmine said, there are a couple times in her business she was like, I can't do this anymore. And I always like to think of it as like when you read a book at 22 and you go back and read the book again at 30. Yeah. There's just different, you've gone through different experiences in life. So you pull different things from the courses, different things resonate with you, stand out to you. And that's the beauty.
Different information even. Yeah,
exactly. And so that's the beauty of this course is that, you get to have it for a lifetime. You get to access it now and in 6 weeks from now or a year from now or 2 years from now. I mean, it's just, and hopefully, what you're pulling from now will be different when you're pulling from the course, when you read it later down the road. So one of the other questions, Jasmine, we have is, your story of how you explored your own artistic style was so inspirational. What was your experience like discovering good flavor profiles for your cakes?
That actually ended up being, this is kind of an appropriate question to follow the last one. Cupcake Wednesday was my experimental outlet. Part of the reason that I felt very comfortable charging only $1 when, the market around me charged $3 for cupcakes was because I was using that time to really kind of push boundaries of what flavors could do. I've always been very interested in novel flavor combinations. One of my kind of cosmic purposes, I feel, and I tell this to clients sometimes, is, I feel like one of my things is to help people surprise themselves. So really pushing the boundaries of cake flavors was important to me. So experimenting during Cupcake Wednesday and then selling them for only $1, I could get really direct feedback because people would maybe sometimes even eat them on the spot and be like, wow, that was really shocking. or like, oh my God, I never would have thought that would have been so good, but now it's my new favorite thing, So it was really fulfilling to do it that way too. But yeah, that experimental process, designing it into your business, I think is important.
Natasha asks, are the flowers in your cakes made out of wafer paper or sugar flowers?
Sugar or rice paper, not wafer paper. It's a different material.
And this is actually a technique that you teach in the course for the first time.
Yes. I think a few people who've seen my work have kind of picked up, what this material is and how to kind of start to play with it a little bit. But, I haven't seen that many people ever really use it. And as far as I know, I was the first.
Yeah, and you actually created a cake this past weekend. You do different types of flowers with it. It's very flexible, and you can kind of mold it and make it your own. I mean, the cake you did this weekend was a peony cake, and the flowers you did for our cakes were a little bit different, which I love.
Yeah, for me, it's I'm less interested in getting them biologically, botanically correct, and more about what sort of movement and feel or quality do they add to the cake.
Yeah, no, it was beautiful. This part of the process and filming was beautiful to watch Jasmine make it because she can treat them differently. There's just so much, room for creative exploration and kind of, in this kind of process of creating these rice paper flowers. Mariah asks, I'm just starting out and I don't have a bakery yet. I'm not sure where I should be hosting my cake tastings. Any suggestions for those starting out?
Yeah, I don't know where you're located. In San Francisco, there are a few places that are kind of almost like co-ops, where, there's an event space and then a lot of wedding vendors will go and meet there. But if you don't have something like that, it might be a great opportunity to connect with a wedding planner who has a space, and being able to, even if you're paying like a really nominal rent or an as need basis or something, or just kind of having some sort of deal where maybe their clients get a special discount on your work as your rent for a meeting in their space, that might be a really nice way to both make a relationship and solve your problem of having a beautiful space to meet with clients.
Andrea asks, how do you scale your business from doing a few cakes a month to doing a few cakes a week while balancing everything else?
Oh my God. It's kind of like the big question. It's really hard to say. I don't even know if I have necessarily the personal experience of that, doing a few cakes a week. Sometimes using that time, because we're not entering this field with a huge degree and we're not kind of set up to, enter into a job that pays us a huge salary, just for the fact that we have a fancy degree. It is a slower build. And so discounting your work at first is very appropriate. I feel that in a way that is your investment. That is your law degree, and you're kind of just doing it on the job. So sometimes it just might involve doing a little bit more work and really hitting the pavement, making connections with other people in the industry, people who could refer you earlier down the line in the kind of the wedding hierarchy of like who gets hired first. So like planners and event spaces, those are the people who are really referring all of the rest of us. So making connections with them and then offering, maybe lower price work or simpler work until you're really able to get a little bit more traction. I think those would be good investments in yourself, your business, and your network, which you're going to need and rely on later anyway.
We've got a lot more questions coming up, but before we do, just want to remind everyone, the payment, we saw a couple questions coming in around payment plans. The payment plans are for US and international residents. Right now, it's only through Thursday, $99 a month. After Thursday, the payment plan price goes up to $249 a month. So it does increase. And then the $400 discount off the retail price also ends on Thursday. And you still have time to purchase the course and receive the color theory video. Jasmine, another question we have is around this dusting technique that you just did in the demo. This seems to only work on a drier fondant. And so how do you manage this when living in a more humid environment like Florida? And you actually troubleshoot this because Atlanta is where we filmed is a very different environment than San Francisco. So we actually get to see you kind of in real time talking about like, how do I adjust for being in a more humid environment?
Yeah, there are a few things you can do for this particular technique. You can just cover your cake in basically a layer of cornstarch. So just use a big, fat, fluffy brush and cornstarch all over it, and that'll dry out the surface enough to be able to play with it in a different way. However, you can also do this technique on a slightly more moist fondant finish because the lifting of the dust, the lifting of the color is just as important a part of it looking more tarnished as the applying or the laying down of the color. So I would say play with it and see what you like better. That's the fun part.
What if I don't have the tools to make the cakes that I feel are better quality artistically? What are good ways to get started building the kitchen I need to be successful at this?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, those are kind of two different questions. In the course, there is a list like of where to acquire a lot of these tools. Some things are really basic, and you could even, I mean, one of the things I would say is challenge yourself to look at things as tools that aren't traditionally tools. And you might actually find that you can innovate something else. Being able to design the cakes that you want to be designing versus the reality of what you can be doing that sort of boundary might actually give you more fodder for creativity. And be prepared to surprise yourself and see, maybe I don't have some of these kind of traditional things that would be really helpful, but what can I do with what I have? You might still want to get those tools and invest in them at some point as you're going, and it might make your process easier and streamline them, but you don't want to lose the thing that's really special that could come out of being limited in the way that you are. And then as far as building the kitchen out, that's a bigger process. If you don't have access to, a kitchen, a lot of people work out of their home kitchen for a really long time until they can find a commercial kitchen to work out of, like a commissary. And if that's not, available locally for you, building out a commercial kitchen, that's a much bigger investment. That's a harder question to answer.
Yeah. Tony asks, so she asks, on your website, I see that your cake minimum is $2,000. I personally feel like I'm not able to charge that much for my location. Does location really matter? And I'm sure this is like a very big question in the cake world. Does it matter? If you live in a smaller market, can you charge what you need to charge, or charge the same amount as someone who lives in, for instance, San Francisco?
Right. I mean, part of the reason that I charge as much as I do, and it can be kind of a shockingly high amount to a lot of other people in part of the country, is it's appropriate where I am. The economy here is, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think New York and San Francisco are like neck and neck for being the most expensive places to live in the United States.
Yeah. Yes. So, so even I am also the most expensive in San Francisco, but I am charging, I feel, really appropriately to the market. It's very rare that that is kind of the main reason why somebody wouldn't work with me. Or sometimes it is, but it's not by a whole lot. So yes, location is really important. Focusing on what is the right business for you, and then in like the 3-prong pricing approach that I was talking about earlier, the third prong is kind of just like checking the reality against the market. What you need to make may be 3 times what your market is what your colleagues are charging in the market. So, kind of reevaluating and assessing, like, what sort of business do I need to have, and am I in a market that can afford that? If you want to make 1 cake a month, you have to check into the reality of is that possible in this local market? And if it's not, do I have access from where I am to those other markets? You might end up flying to other countries or, other states and doing a lot of other destination weddings if that's the sort of specialty you want to go for.
Yeah, and the great thing about, your discussion on pricing and your model is that it's not just specific to the San Francisco area. It's something you can kind of adapt and change based on where you live.
Right. Yeah. You don't necessarily need to charge what I'm charging because you might live somewhere that's, the cost of living is a lot lower, but it could still be proportionate to your economy, your local economy.
Yeah. This is an interesting question, and this is something I've personally experienced at a wedding. Fondant does not taste very good. Usually people do not eat it. How do you make fondant taste divine? Do people eat your fondant?
No. I use satin ice, so it tastes the way that it tastes. And I particularly, I don't particularly like the flavor of it either. Most of the techniques that I do, the fondant is so thin, it doesn't really contribute much to the flavor party at all. And that's kind of on purpose too. That was kind of part of the approach for me stylistically, is to be able to ensure that I'm still honoring the flavors of the cake. So, there's that. I don't do anything to enhance the fondant. The flavor of it. I don't think there's too much you can do. It's just like so super sweet. It's sweeter than anything else that's in my cakes. So, a lot of people do make their fondant, and I think that, that's a really fine approach if that feels like something that you can do and, feels really good and right for your business. But I just try and limit how much is actually on the cake. And I try to advise the caterers, if I can, to kind of help remove it. And then there are clients who actually like it. So, there are a lot of people who like the flavor of fondant. So I don't necessarily, want to demonize it too much.
We're going to get to a few more questions, and then Jasmine's going to try to spend a little time in the chat answering questions as well before she has to head off and pick up her son, like all kind of mothers, entrepreneurial mothers have to do, balancing work and family life. But we saw a couple that joined the webinar late and asked questions about payment plans. Yes, they're still available. $99 a month through Thursday. There's a link in the profile. Feel free to email us at info@ifimade.com if you have any questions. And the $400 discount also ends on Thursday as well. So this question, Jasmine, is from Sarah. She says, there's a lot of tiers in your cake, it seems. Is this the case for all your cakes, or do you tend to make some of them dummy tiers to get the wow height factor?
Yeah, sometimes I will use dummy tiers. There are a variety of reasons why I might recommend dummy tiers. One, if the guest count is a lot higher than, or if the size of the cake they want is a lot bigger than the guest count needs, or if it's like in Napa Valley outside and 90-degree weather in July, or if they want to take and actually save a piece of the cake. Sometimes that happens. I'm not talking about the real cake, but I'm talking about a piece of cake that they can put on display, on their mantle under a glass dome or something. So, having faux tiers for that might be helpful. Or just if their guest count is really large and it would be cumbersome for the caterers to cut the cake, like 300 pieces. It takes a long time to cut it all up. If they have sheet cake in the back and then, a partially faux or mostly faux cake in the front, that can be really helpful. So it really just depends, but you can still make a very large cake that's all real and it be structurally sound. It just requires more cake engineering.
Yeah, and this is actually something you talk about in your course, pricing for an all dummy cake, kind of a hybrid cake of dummy and real, sheet cake. I mean, these are all the intricacies of pricing that when you Google how do you price a wedding cake that people aren't discussing. And I think that's what makes this course so valuable is these are the questions and struggles that you guys are dealing with in a day-to-day basis of, how do you price these different types of cakes, these hybrid cakes, sheet cakes. All of this is covered in the course. Abby asks, and this kind of speaks to cake engineering, Jasmine, do you freeze the cakes before decorating these detailed designs?
I'm so sorry. I've just been so struck by how beautiful people's words are in the comments and really appreciating a lot of the compliments. So thank you, everybody who's just really, getting something out of this. Could you ask your question again?
Yeah, no problem. Abby asks about, do you freeze cakes before decorating them?
Yes, just to tighten the crumb. I'll freeze them just the night before I start decorating them. So I'm not baking a week in advance, and I'm only baking still a couple days in advance of the event, and then we freeze them that night just so the crumb is tight, and then it becomes a lot easier to work on. It's a lot less unstable. Less unstable, it's more stable.
Cool. Jasmine, logistics is such a huge question about transporting cakes, and I know you go into a lot more detail about this in the course, and it's not something we could answer with just a quick, 2-sentence answer. But what's kind of the best method for supporting 3-tiered cakes and transporting them? Is there any quick tips that you can give people around this, or is it one of those things that it's kind of an extensive process?
No, I mean, there are a couple of quick tips I can say, and there are a couple of products on the market too. I'm actually working with another company right now trying to design a new kind of cake delivery box.
Ooh, very exciting.
Yeah, because there's the Cake Safe, which I have never used, but I've heard really great things about it. It does require a large pole going through the entirety of your wedding cake, and I don't really know too much about, does that pole stay inside or do you have to pull it out when you get there? There are going to be other people who know more about the Cake Safe and that product and working with it, and maybe check in if you know someone who has one. But for me, I think it's really important that the cakes stay very, very cold, and the Cake Safe isn't insulated. So personally, I use coolers, essentially. But keeping the cake cold is important, and the internal structure is really important. And then, driving as comfortably as you can, tracking whether there are hills. But really, it's not as much about the bumps or, hills as much as it is about the acceleration, deceleration, and centrifugal force. Those are the things that really kill your cakes in delivery.
We've got before we wrap up, Jasmine, I know you're going to also continue to answer some questions in the chat. Just want to remind you guys, you can still purchase the course, still get access to the discount, and you can still get that wonderful color theory video while Jasmine's answering questions in the chat. To end this webinar, I love this question, Jasmine. There are many people jumping into the cake industry recently. Where do you think this industry will be in 5 years?
I mean, I hope we're going to be seen more as artists. I hope we're going to be embraced more by society at large for, the incredible creativity and skill that we bring to what we create. I hope it's going to be more personal. I hope we're going to see, fewer copycat cakes and more, not to say anything bad about that, because, we all have to kind of make it still. But that people are able to really tap more into like how to make something that feels fulfilling and personal to them. So I'm expecting and hoping we're going to see a larger variety of cake expressions in general.
Cool.
Very exciting.
Well, Jasmine, thank you so much for your time. And thank you to everyone who tuned in late this evening. I know East Coasters, it's getting close to 10 o'clock, and we just really appreciate you guys joining in with us and sharing and asking questions. Jasmine's going to be staying in the chat and answering some more of your questions. And then always feel free to info us at info@ifimade.com. We'd love it when you share your experiences and your thoughts and inspiration behind the webinar and social media. We'll be looking out for it. And Jasmine, thank you again for being here with us and just sharing all your knowledge that you've acquired over the last 10 years in the industry.
My pleasure. Thank you, Emily. And thank you for that phone call many, many months ago for proposing we do this.
Awesome. All right, everyone, have a great evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.